All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks once again to everyone for being here. Um, my name is Allison Chan, and I am the political director here at Save the Bay. For those of you who may be new to our organization and our work, Save the Bay is the largest regional organization that works to protect and restore the San Francisco Bay for people and wildlife. So today, as I mentioned, we're presenting Greening Our Communities, the second in our series of climate conversations. And during this session, we'll cover how green stormwater infrastructure can help to manage flooding from intensifying storms and reduce pollution runoff into the bay. We're thrilled to be joined by three excellent panelists. Assemblymember Diane Papan, who represents San Mateo County, which is the county in California that's most at risk of flooding. Alicia Gilbreath, an environmental scientist at the San Francisco Estuary Institute, who will explain what green stormwater infrastructure is and how it manages stormwater and water pollution. And finally, Kira Maritano, Senior Project Manager at the Trust for Public Land, who will discuss greening in a very important community space, our schoolyards. So the way today will go is we'll start with short presentations from each of our speakers, followed by a conversational Q&A portion. Assemblymember Papan has to leave for another commitment at 5:45, so we'll make sure to ask her questions toward the beginning and then focus on our other esteemed panelists. So if you would like to add your voice to the discussion, please use the Q&A feature to leave a question at any time during the presentations. And if you have a logistical question, feel free to message our moderator, Haley Courier, directly. So we know the impacts of climate change are vast, varied, and unpredictable, swinging wildly between the record storms and flooding we saw last winter and the record heat we're seeing this summer. These extremes put infrastructure, homes, and human lives at risk. Government at every level, from local to federal, must plan for all of these impacts if we're going to keep communities safe and help them thrive. So in order to do this, we must innovate. The infrastructure, planning, and technology of the past are not sufficient to address the ongoing and evolving crises that we face. In many cities across the country, the existing stormwater infrastructure, which includes the pipes, inlets, channels, and pump stations that direct water away from buildings and people when it rains, these systems are in great need of maintenance and can't handle the large volumes of water that accompany the powerful storms we are now facing here in California, as well as across the country. So while this hard infrastructure, also known as gray infrastructure, will need to be upgraded, it only does one thing, and that's to manage stormwater. Green stormwater infrastructure is a way of managing stormwater that mimics nature. It's what we call a nature-based solution, and it provides multiple benefits to communities on top of helping to reduce flood risk. It reduces pollution in the bay, greens and cools our neighborhoods, increases biodiversity, and makes streets more comfortable and desirable for walking and biking. So in that way, green infrastructure is both a climate resilience as well as a climate mitigation strategy. So as we improve our communities and pursue solutions like greening, we must also ensure to not replicate the problems of the past. So in particular, new solutions must center equity by prioritizing investments in low-income communities of color and ensuring that solutions are developed and supported by community members themselves. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker in more detail. So welcome, Alicia. Our first speaker, as I mentioned, is Alicia Gilbreath, environmental scientist at the San Francisco Estuary Institute. SFEI provides scientific support and tools for decision-making and communication through collaborative efforts. They provide independent science to assess and improve the health of the waters, wetlands, wildlife, and landscapes of San Francisco Bay, the California Delta, and beyond. So welcome, Alicia, and please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Allison. Thank you, Save the Bay. Thank you to my other panelists and all of you for being here. It's totally an honor. I'm going to tell you a little bit about green infrastructure. Go ahead and next slide. Tell you a little bit about green infrastructure, how it works, and how it can help us moderate the impacts of climate change. Next slide. So, okay, green infrastructure, it is a set of practices or techniques that take advantage of the natural processes of soils and plants to achieve many, many different environmental and social benefits in the urban landscape. As Allison mentioned, initially, well, we're working with gray infrastructure, typically across the landscape, this harder infrastructure, and green infrastructure was brought into the landscape to help with moderating stormwater runoff by using lots of different green infrastructure across the landscape. It's more a distributed network of units for stormwater capture and detention in otherwise highly impervious cities and landscapes. It can range from being highly engineered to much more natural, less designed greening. Next slide. Actually, sorry, go back one slide. I want to take you through a few examples of, other way, of what green infrastructure is, or some examples in the environment. So on the right, we see some bioretention features. I'll show you how bioretention works. Now, next slide. Okay, cool. So here we're looking at the surface layer of a bioretention unit, and during a big storm event like we're seeing in this diagram, rainfall and stormwater runoff is coming off the streets and flowing into this bioretention unit. It's got some beautiful flowers, a tree, and whatnot. Go ahead and forward to the next slide. Thank you. This is where the magic happens. It's under the ground, really. So water flows in, and then it starts to infiltrate down through the bioretention planting mix. Often there's a gravel layer underneath that, and then it soaks into the native soils underneath. And by infiltrating all this water, it's decreasing the amount of water that goes into the storm system. Now, a lot of these units actually do have an underdrain, as pictured in this diagram. So what doesn't kind of flow down into the native soil can enter into that perforated pipe, and it goes back into the storm drain system here. But there's two big advantages, even though some of that water is getting back into the storm drain system. First of all, it's been filtered through the soils, and so it's cleaner. There's lots of pollution that's been captured, and this is where my team, we study the pollution that gets captured in these units. Also, because it's infiltrated down, it's entering back into the storm drain system at a much slower pace than what's flowing off the rest of the landscape into the gray infrastructure. So by including green infrastructure into the network, we can slow the process of stormwater runoff and help our systems, our gray infrastructure systems, manage all of that runoff. Next slide. So here's some more examples of what green infrastructure may look like in the environment. On the left, there's swales. This is a lot like a bioretention feature. They tend to be linear, though, and actually convey water in a certain direction, but there's still that infiltrating work that's going on. There's green roofs, capturing rainfall falling onto roofs. And we'll talk about other benefits of these, but go ahead and forward to the next slide. So greenways are like whole long alleys of greenness, or whole streets and of lots of different green features. Even street trees we can think of as urban greening and green infrastructure. It's intercepting, capturing water and slowing it from, and preventing some of it from getting into the storm system. Next slide. I do want to point out that green infrastructure happens at a variety of scales, and they're all really important. They all serve super important functions. But on the top pictures, we've got some really robust, commercial properties. On the right, that's Urban Ottima in Berkeley. Those are some kind of extensive systems that have been applied. But on the bottom, you can even do these yourself or done on a lower budget, lower scale. There's really no end to Googling and finding diagrams and instructions and videos on how to do your own rain garden, for example. So it's kind of exciting. This is really, really taking hold across the country and the world. Next slide. Here's some local examples of green infrastructure around the Bay Area. And again, these vary in scale and kind of intensiveness of installation. Next slide. And there's, I said there's a lot of benefits, right? We talked a little bit about stormwater and infiltration and pollution capture, but there's a ton of different multiple benefits of greening. So there's also public benefits, social and health benefits to the public. There's lots of ecological benefits. There's decreased energy demands from some of these features, as well as carbon sequestration. Forward to the next slide. Yeah, that's perfect. So these are the three areas that I'm going to focus on in the next few slides. Runoff reduction, capturing runoff for reuse, and reduced extreme heat, because these are some of the ones that climate change, all of these benefits are great for climate change and a changing climate as we move into the next several decades. But these three kind of screamed to me, what's going to happen with climate change. Next slide. So runoff reduction, as I talked about, we can apply green infrastructure across the landscape to help us manage water, help us infiltrate water so it's not getting into the system, and also help capture pollutants. But many cities have looked at gray versus green options. So Allison mentioned actually that a lot of our infrastructure is aging. It's aging out really, and also it's getting overwhelmed by increased runoff from increased impervious surfaces as cities build out and become more and more impervious. So these systems are in need of either retrofit or increasing their capacity. And a lot of cities have looked at, what are the alternatives? Are there nature-based solutions that can be used? So Philadelphia is one example where they found that green infrastructure at about $2.5 billion over the next 25 years was thank you, Haley, was on par with about $9.5 billion of gray infrastructure upgrades. The SFPUC locally is looking at system upgrades that are including a mix of gray and green infrastructure. Next slide. So runoff can be captured for reuse. So we're looking at some in this picture some rain barrels that can capture water during a rain event. Los Angeles found that enhancing groundwater recharge from that infiltration down through the soils using green infrastructure practices could supply approximately $310 million worth of water per year. Next slide. And again, we're looking at by greening the urban environment, we can really reduce extreme heat. So this is just a quick example of when the air temperature is about 95 degrees out, the grass in shade is about 91 degrees. Man, blacktop is 140 degrees. So bringing shade into our environment can do a lot for health around cities. I'll just mention too, green roofs. They're finding that green roofs can reduce cooling energy needs by 50-75%. Next slide. This is my last slide. I just want to point out a few things that you can do. So you can volunteer to help maintain GI. This is a great infrastructure. This is a really important need right now. You can put in your own rain harvesting system or rain garden. You can support measures to fund and maintain green infrastructure. And I really want to point out, you can talk about it. This is huge to bringing the rest of society on board with green infrastructure and really getting behind it. So I'll leave the rest for conversation later.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I loved your visuals. It's such a great vision for our communities and such tangible benefits. So that was a really wonderful overview. Thank you. So we're going to move right along here. Next, we have Assemblymember Diane Papan. Diane Papan is originally from San Mateo County and was first elected to the California State Assembly in November 2022. We are grateful for her support of important legislation such as ACA 1, which some of you may have seen in the media recently, and the Assemblymember may touch on that. Which would make it easier to raise money for affordable housing and essential infrastructure like stormwater and green stormwater infrastructure. Prior to this role, she served as the mayor and city council member in the city of San Mateo, where she championed investments for infrastructure, transit, and of course, climate adaptation. So thanks for joining us, Assemblymember Papan, and we're excited to hear from you tonight.
Thank you so much, Allison. And Alicia, I got to say, I so enjoyed your presentation. I think you put me in the best mood I've been in a long time. It was wonderful to see both on a grand scale and a small scale, and the idea of reusing and recharging. Oh my gosh, you made my recycling heart go pitter patter. So I just can't say enough about your presentation. Thank you so much. I thought what I would do, first of all, I'm very pleased to be here with you to kind of discuss what I consider to be a pretty enormously important topic. And I come from a county that's very uniquely impacted by climate change, as Allison kind of alluded to in her opening remarks. And as a result, we will, in the county I represent most of San Mateo County, they will really need adaptive infrastructure more than any other county, at least proportionately in the state of California. We have two coasts, about 53 miles of bay shoreline and 58 miles of coastline. So we'll need to get very busy very quickly, because even if we stop polluting in the morning, we have to adapt. Climate change is here, and our resiliency and our quality of life, if not life itself, will depend upon how equipped we are to really adapt. So I thought what I might do is talk just a little bit from a governmental standpoint, what some of these adaptation projects and plans kind of go through. And then I can get into a little bit of the financing that's happening at the state level, which I'm super excited about. So as I mentioned, San Mateo County, the most vulnerable county in the state to sea level rise. They also have numerous drainage from dozens of small and large creeks that drain from the eastern and western slopes of the Santa Cruz Mountains. On the bay side, it gets a little trickier, and that's primarily my district. You've got dense urban development stretching both from Daly City all the way down to East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. So that represents an extraordinary challenge of a whole bunch of impermeable surfaces, as we saw from Alicia's excellent pictures. So, and in my county, it includes nearly 4,000 lanes of city streets and roads. So San Mateo County has a countywide water pollution prevention program, and that was established way back in 1990 to reduce the pollution carried by stormwater into local creeks, the San Francisco Bay, and the Pacific Ocean. So the coordinated effort is sort of a partnership that's run by the City and County Association of Governments called CCAG, and that consists of each incorporated city and town in the county and the county of San Mateo. And they share a common national pollutant discharge elimination system permit. There's a lot of acronyms here. You're lucky I'm just saying them out loud rather than speaking acronyms. But through that program, San Mateo County Stormwater Resource Plan was developed. So everything needs a plan. When you want to fund something in government, you got to have a plan first. So through CCAG, they developed the San Mateo County Stormwater Resource Plan. And it identifies and prioritizes opportunities to better utilize stormwater as a resource in San Mateo County. As Alicia so adeptly pointed out, if we capture stormwater, her slide said $310 million worth of water in LA County alone. So that's why those kind of things just make my heart go pitter patter. So the Stormwater Resource Plan, of course, is a required document for all local agencies so that it enables them to be competitive with state grant funding for these projects. And since the development of this plan, the San Mateo County co-permittees under the Municipal Regional Stormwater Permit have developed local green infrastructure plans and implemented dozens of projects. In 2020, based on that ongoing work, the San Mateo County-wide Sustainable Street Master Plan was published. And that helps support the member agencies to integrate green infrastructure into local street planning efforts, from islands to little planters in parking lots, public parking lots. So it really was important to sort of identify places of opportunity where we could prioritize funding for green infrastructure projects. So the Sustainable Street Master Plan is an attempt to help cities better align their synergies with transportation and streetscape projects so that we can really get GSI on a pretty greenscape infrastructure on a more robust scale, if you will. And I want to point out just one example here in my county. So Bay Meadows used to be a racetrack. It is now a housing development. And part and parcel of the permit of that housing development was a green stormwater infrastructure project. And so there, on the public right-of-ways, you have a lot of what you saw, pictures like what Alicia showed you, real small infrastructure, green infrastructure where water is captured down below. It also has a park with an enormous pond, which is a stormwater capture pond. So it's pretty to walk around in the park, but it also serves as a way of capturing stormwater. So I'm enormously proud of that. But that was really when the project was being built out. You know, in the peninsula, we have a lot of really dense, as I mentioned, already existing urban infrastructure. So it's going to take a lot to sort of work with redeveloping that infrastructure. And a lot of it comes when you're maybe redoing a street. And then we try to incorporate in the redevelopment of the project something that includes some green infrastructure, whether it be the parking structure or the streets in front of the project, whatever it may be. And local government plays a role in that because a lot of times when they approve a project, there has to be certain public benefits. So they're starting to ask more and more for these public benefits from developers because it's really going to take a public-private partnership. There aren't always going to be public funds sufficient to do this. So I'm enormously proud of some of what I have seen as an elected official in trying to get the public-private partnership going so that we can do some of this green infrastructure it also helps us comply with some of the trash capture that we have to do. So it's a win, 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 win. And that's why I think I was so excited to be a part of this discussion because a lot of things you do in government, they might move you one step forward and a half step back. I don't see green infrastructure as doing that. And I really look forward to finding ways that we can fund it. And I think I will wait, Allison, until you're ready to ask questions about funding. And I will also tap in on the equity piece when you're ready for me.
Well, great. That's perfect. Keeping people on the edge of their seats. Thank you, Assemblymember, for those remarks. And I'm glad you reminded me and called out the San Mateo County Sustainable Streets Master Plan. That's the kind of sort of visionary, planning that we want to see, every county in the Bay Area do, frankly. So thanks for reminding folks of that, and definitely encourage people to go check that out. And Save the Bay and many of our partners are active in trying to help cities across the county bring that master plan to life. So yes, I will absolutely press you more on the funding and equity questions in a few minutes. So thank you. So finally, we have Kira Maritano, a Senior Project Manager for the Trust for Public Land. Welcome, Kira. So the Trust for Public Land creates parks and parks and protects public land in order to connect people to nature and the outdoors. Kira works to create quality parks and living schoolyards in our neighborhoods, especially those critically lacking urban green space. She's been an integral part of TPL's pilot program with the Oakland Unified School District, which transformed 4 asphalt-covered schoolyards into vibrant park-like settings. So thank you for being here, Kira, and we're excited to hear from you today.
Thank you, Allison. I'm so happy to be here with everyone and talk a little bit about green infrastructure on living schoolyards. You can move to the next slide. So let's start with the definition. Terms like living schoolyard and green schoolyard and community schoolyard are kind of thrown around and people have different definitions. But when I talk about living schoolyards, what I mean is a schoolyard that feels more like a park and less like a parking lot. So it's going to contain a lot of the green infrastructure interventions that Alicia talked about, but it's also going to provide community benefits through those green infrastructure pieces and go beyond that. So it's a big word that describes a big idea, and I hope these photos kind of give a sense of what I mean. Next slide. So what might you see on a living schoolyard? You're definitely going to see permeable surfaces. That's a critical component. You're going to see native and climate appropriate plantings. You're going to see nature play areas, shade, community gathering spaces, and more. You might see art. Sports are still an important part of a living schoolyard, but we try to integrate green infrastructure so that they're more supported and more shaded. Next slide. So why focus on schoolyards? I think Alicia did a great job of talking about all the many benefits and layered benefits that green infrastructure provides. And obviously the Assembly member has seen that hands-on in San Mateo County. But additionally on schoolyards, we're really seeing how those green infrastructure benefits get layered onto community benefits. So we see improved health for students and community. We see improved learning. We see improved community cohesion. Next slide, please. I think these three photos do a good job of kind of illustrating what I'm talking about. So the photo on the left is a rain garden on the edge of a public schoolyard in East Oakland. And it offers all the green infrastructure benefits that Alicia mentioned. So it's absorbing precipitation, it's filtering the water before it goes to the bay, it's recharging our groundwater. But additionally, it's right there on the edge of the schoolyard, and the school is in a dense urban neighborhood, so it softens the edge, provides a little bit of distance and privacy for the students, and those trees planted in the bioswale are going to cast shade onto the active sports area, so they're going to cool the students while they play. The photo in the center is a student who's just harvested a bunch of carrots from their school garden. So their school garden is an unpaved space that absorbs stormwater, full of trees, but additionally it's offering the opportunity for the students on the site to learn about gardening, nutrition, cooking. And the photo on the right shows a simple intervention at a schoolyard. It's a cutout of asphalt with a bench with a tree in the middle. It's not rocket science, but look how many parents have a comfortable place to sit and wait for their kids to get out of school. And just imagine when that coast live oak in the center is mature and they're under the shade of a tree. You know, East Oakland is a neighborhood that gets really, really hot. So providing that climate infrastructure of shade trees is really important. Next slide, please. This is Cesar Chavez campus in East Oakland. These photos show their nature play area. So they have a beautiful climbing structure that's over engineered wood fiber. So instead of rubber safety surface, this is a permeable, cool material, and it allows us to integrate trees really close to the play structure. So in the long run, these kids will be playing underneath the shade of trees. Next slide, please. This is another shot of Cesar Chavez, a before and after, so you can see what a large expanse of asphalt there was at the site and how these simple green infrastructure improvements like the permeable play area and these shade trees and boxes start to help delineate the space. So when parents and teachers and students are moving around the site, they have different pathways. When you enter the campus, you're not just stepping into a kickball game, right? You can walk on one side of the trees or the other. There's integrated seating, and there will be plentiful shade. Next slide. This is a shot of Cesar Chavez's orchard, a beautiful setting, used to be entirely paved. Now it has fruit trees that will offer food to the community. And on the left, you can see their turf playfield. So the kids used to play soccer on asphalt or on a patch of crabgrass next to a fire hydrant. Now they have a soft, resilient surface to play on. Wonderful for the children, much cooler surface temperatures per the chart that Alicia showed. And additionally, it all absorbs stormwater. I also really like this photo because you can see the BART rail in the background, which really gives you a sense of how urban this school site is and how this greening can really help soften the campus and make it feel more welcoming and more park-like. Next slide, please. This is Markham Elementary, also in East Oakland, and this shows a before and after of an area of the campus that was another long expanse of hot black asphalt that was transitioned into a flexible space that can be used for play, for outdoor learning, for outdoor eating, and is populated with native plants that were planted by the students of the school. Next slide, please. This shot also at Markham kind of shows layers of different green infrastructure zones. So we have the garden in the foreground. That's a permeable area. Then we have the play field, also permeable. And then we have that row of shade trees that are going to cast shade onto the play zone. Next slide, please. Green schoolyards are also really fun. So this shows a group of girls playing in their new shaded seating area. Again, when those oaks grow up, this is going to be a really cool shady area. And even in the meantime, it's a fun area that offers a different angle on play than the standard sports courts of an asphalt play area. So we hear through studies that it's actually proven that girls' physical activity levels increase after green schoolyard renovations because of that alternate form of play that's offered. Next slide, please. I love this series because it shows the vision to reality and how impactful it can be to get students involved. So we see children visioning their future garden beds, getting to actually help build them and then maintain them. Next slide, please. This is really sweet. So again, this is a garden space, very simple, asphalt removed. It now provides a super valuable socio-emotional space for students. We hear from the principal that when kids feel dysregulated and they need a break, their favorite place to go is the garden, and they just want to dig in the dirt. It's fun, and it also provides those kinds of green infrastructure benefits that we're learning about. Next slide, please. Nothing worth doing comes easily. There are challenges to building green schoolyards, but I promise they're well worth working through. It's really important that green schoolyards are designed through a holistic community process, and that takes time. So it's not about plunking trees down willy-nilly. It's about really talking to the community about what challenges they face and how renovating their schoolyard can serve to remedy some of those issues. And green infrastructure is a piece of that. Installing new features means relying on old existing infrastructure. So we're tying into old water lines, right? And some of these schools haven't had infrastructure updated in a long time. So the costs can really escalate because of that. Soil conditions can be challenging when you're removing asphalt that's been in place for 50 years, sometimes more. The soil underneath is not much like soil. It's a lot like concrete itself. So it takes work and amendments to generate it into a space where it can hold plantings well. And sometimes there's toxicity, right? We're working in underserved urban neighborhoods in the Bay. There's contamination. Sometimes we need to do cleanup, but that's the right thing to do and definitely worth the effort. DSA permitting. DSA is the division of the state architect. All schoolyard projects go through their purview, and that's costly and time consuming as well. And then of course, maintenance and stewardship. It's so important that these sites are maintained. They do take more love every day, but overall they are more affordable in the long run. It's switching your lens about how costs are managed. So yeah, challenges to be had, but well worth the benefits of safer and thriving spaces for students, families, and teachers. All right, next slide. That's it for me. I'll save the rest for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Kira. I'm just jealous that all of your presentations include like beautiful green spaces and happy children playing. It's just so inspiring. The work that you're doing is amazing. And thanks for, helping bring the vision to life. That's the implementation side of it is no easy feat, but so rewarding. So thank you for that. And so now we've come to the exciting portion of the evening where I get to ask you more questions. We're going to bring all of our speakers into a conversation to dive a little bit deeper into the issues that you all raised. So again, for folks who are joining as guests and participants tonight, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. So, all right, let's dive in. Some of these, as I mentioned, some of these questions will be for the full panel. A few of these will be directed at individuals. But let's just start with the full panel, and then we'll go into a few questions specifically for you, Assembly Member. And equity came up a couple times during during your presentations in the last half hour as such an important consideration in the process of bringing more green infrastructure to our communities. So I would love to hear from you all. What does an equitable implementation of green stormwater infrastructure look like from your perspective? How do we make sure that planning for the future doesn't again replicate the inequities of the past when it comes to this, multi-benefit nature-based infrastructure? So that's my question. I'll invite the first person who can unmute the quickest, or I'm happy to call on you. Oh,
It's
there you
me,
go,
it's me.
Alicia, the winner, yes.
Okay,
Please.
I'll be quick. Okay, I would put forward that green infrastructure investment should be proportionate to the impacts of climate change and environmental injustice. So this would result in a disproportionate amount of investment in low income and communities of color. And again, well, in any case, I will also just add a caveat that communities, as Kira mentioned, have to be brought into the planning process. And it's important not to assume what any particular community desires.
Yeah, I'll just tag on to that and say that we also in the schoolyard work see schoolyards as a great way to add in park space to communities that don't have adequate park space. So just looking at open space access and thinking about green infrastructure as a way to build in access to recreational opportunities is a great lens to kind of prioritize where the need is.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would just note that there oftentimes when there's application for money, they have a scoring rubric, and sometimes it may be that an area that has the most urgent or significant challenges or need to control flooding or pollution might rise to the top, but that doesn't always mean that it's the community with the most equity concerns, if you will. And so it may be that we have to alter that rubric a little bit to make sure that there's a balancing out of needs. So I think it will require a somewhat surgical approach to make sure that the underserved come into that mix, and it's not just solely the urgent needs of, say, sea level rise. One of my bills that is been sent to the governor's desk, and I do hope will be signed, requires that where pollution exists and there are fines that are paid, at least 40% of that money comes back to the community that was polluted. And oftentimes those are communities of color, to make sure that the work actually gets done. Now, the State Water Board has garnered that money for some time and has a bit of a slush fund, if you will. And that was the purpose of the bill, is we wanted to make sure that some of that money comes back to the impacted community. I don't even ask for 100%. The bill started at 50% of the money, and then I went down to 40% of the money. So I am hopeful that my reasonableness makes the bill very attractive to the governor, and it does get signed so that funding does come back to communities that are impacted, as I said, which are often communities of color, communities where equity should be a very important part of how projects are determined to be completed.
Yeah, these are all great. Oh, please.
Can I add one more thing, Allison?
Yes,
I just wanted to say, this made me think of the fact that a lot of this money for green infrastructure is for implementation, and communities that are really in need might not have the resources to adequately maintain them. And green infrastructure does take a different kind of maintenance than gray infrastructure. So I think as funders build their budgets and what they have to offer, considering long-term maintenance funding for communities is really critical so that these projects can actually be successful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some of that maintenance, could be in the form of local jobs and local job development. So, there's another, how many wins are we up to, Assembly Member? You had, I think, 5 in a row. So I'll win, and win. So yeah, thanks all for raising those points. So since you got on the subject, Assemblymember Papan, I would love to hear more about your advocacy around funding. I mean, you rightfully identified where funding should have this sort of return to source mandate around it. But at the core, local government does not have the funding it needs to implement solutions, no matter how visionary they are. So we're going to need to get creative about bringing more state and federal funding to our local government. So can you talk a little bit about some of the legislation that you're supporting, championing, hoping voters will support that will help to chip away at this challenge?
I thought you'd never ask, Allison. So the two that I want to highlight and I want to talk about, I'm a co-author on both. The first is ACA 1, as you mentioned in your introduction, Allison. And what that does is it reduces the threshold for infrastructure bonds. And they can be both housing bonds or infrastructure, which I think includes a lot of climate adaptation infrastructure, to a 55% threshold. And for so long, localities have been limping along trying to reach the 2/3 threshold to pass legislation. In my county, we created the flood and sea level rise district called One Shoreline, and we for a year and a half polled how well we might do with a parcel tax, because that district that we created needs some long-term funding, and but it would have required a 2/3 threshold. So we shall see whether or not maybe a bond is a better way to go. And with a 55% threshold, that district might have a little bit more success in long-term funding. The other thing is the climate adaptation bond. You may have heard about it. It's AB 1567. I'm also a co-author on that bond. My colleague Eddie Garcia from Southern California is the principal author, and that proposes about $16 billion in general obligation bond directly set aside for a range of investments to support climate resilience in our state. It's the first of its kind. It should be slated for the ballot in November of 2024. The governor really wanted his mental health / housing bond to be a big priority for the March 2024 ballot. So it's looking like this climate bond might go in November of 2024, but it includes hundreds of millions of dollars for stormwater investments, including stormwater capture, recharging of groundwater supplies, multiple benefit flood management projects, particularly in the urban environment. And I think that green infrastructure will play a key role in garnering some of that money so that we have more of it and more projects that come to fruition. And I'll give a shout out for maintenance as well. Just to let you know I'm listening, Kira.
Yeah, fantastic. And there were a couple of questions about maintenance. I know that is one of the ongoing challenges of funding green stormwater infrastructure and frankly, other climate resilience projects that require more than just laying a pipe and walking away. So I think making sure, as you noted, that funding, as both of you noted, Kira and Assemblymember Papan, that funding programs don't overlook that need is so critical. So thank you for outlining those opportunities coming up next year for all of us to be able to weigh in on, thankfully. So I hope that's good motivation for folks. Do you have time for another question, or do you need to run?
I could do one more, and then I have to go give a check to city council.
Oh, well, that's always important. Talking about more local funding.
Money. It's like,
Yeah.
But I would love to stay for just one more if you want to shoot one my way, or I'll chime in after Allison or Kira. Or Alicia or Kira, sorry.
Well, why don't we do one question for the whole panel, and that way everyone can weigh in on this. So all of you have done a great job about outlining opportunities for funding and how green infrastructure works and why it's so great. But what's one thing that you wish people understood about green stormwater infrastructure? that you think might make the difference between the amount of implementation you see now and the amount of implementation that we're going to need to, protect communities and protect water quality and be resilient in the future? What should people understand? If you were to drive home that one elevator pitch point, what would that be?
Well, I would say it gives you the greatest bang for your buck, whether that's, Alicia's slide with however hundreds of millions to recapture water, or to Kira's point, you have these beautiful greenscapes in schoolyards, and if we can capture the water to keep that going, you're getting the best bang for your buck. So why wouldn't you want that? So for me, that's my elevator pitch. It's not only is a win-win-win, but it gives you the best bang for your buck. And I feel as an elected, we are fiscal stewards, and if we can deliver that for the public, we're doing our job.
I think I would add to the Assembly members' points that there's such a beautiful logic to this work. It makes so much sense that I think occasionally people almost take it for granted. They go, it's simple. Okay, great. Plant the trees. And I want people to take it seriously. It offers such real benefits. I think we need to contextualize it as real infrastructure, right? This isn't a cutesy little project. This is real infrastructure. And moving forward, it's what our infrastructure needs to look like more and more. So I think people need to accept the cost, because it takes real money to make it happen in a way that's sustainable and lasting and is going to be maintained. So I think I want people to kind of shift their cultural framework about what infrastructure is and start to really see trees as infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, you two totally nailed it. I mean, I'll just say, I think that if we were, I'm not an economist, and I know there's like different ways of valuing different benefits, right? Like it's easy to put a number on water capture, or, lessening the impact on your storm sewer system. And it's a lot harder to put numbers to the, number of, all the health benefits and all the social benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But if we really do the economic analysis, green infrastructure is a no-brainer. It is so much more cost-effective than retrofitting and upgrading and installing new gray infrastructure. It is a no-brainer, and what we have to do is do those economic analyses well, get that understood by everybody, and then find the funding that draws on multiple sources. Right now, it's very single source, or it's kind of the funding is siloed from one particular angle of water management or carbon sequestration, et cetera. And we need to pool those funding sources together to support green infrastructure. So that would be it for me.
You all are very compelling spokespeople for this. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Papan, for your time tonight. Have fun delivering that enormous check, and we really appreciate your participation.
Thank you for your interest, and keep up the good work. I was just delighted to be with you. Really delighted.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Well, okay, so Kira and Alicia, can we dive into a little bit more of the technical side of this? Because we are getting some curiosity from the audience here about some of the technical sides of things. So can we talk a little bit about permeable pavement? People are interested in where permeable pavement is used, where you think it's most appropriately used, how it's being integrated into projects. Maybe you have an example of where permeable pavement has been a feature. So would love to hear from one or both of you about permeable pavement.
Take it away, Alicia. We haven't used permeable paving on the schoolyards. We've used permeable surfaces, but permeable paving we haven't ventured into.
Well, that's probably of interest to the permeable surfaces. Permeable paving is actually something I'm a lot less familiar with, but essentially the idea is that you've got pavers, and then sort of there's like the cracks between the pavers, right, that are allowing infiltration in. And I know, your underlying soil has to be infiltrative to allow the water to keep soaking in. I think they can be very effective. I know there's been some installations in San Francisco and probably elsewhere in the region. But I'm sorry, I don't know all the technical benefits and costs of challenges associated with permeable pavers. But Kira, what do you think about permeable surfaces?
Well, I'll add on to the permeable paving piece, which is to say that I've heard just in the landscape architecture world that one issue with it, in addition to the soil conditions below, as you mentioned, is the spaces between can get filled in with sediment, so they need to be power washed. So it's another maintenance concern. So for some school districts, that might be burdensome. But we use a lot of different permeable pavings. I mentioned some in my presentation, like engineered wood fiber as a fall surface is a great option compared to rubber safety surfacing. We do a lot of decomposed granite paths, which aren't particularly absorptive, but we usually do them surrounded by planting areas. So they're basically just running off into the adjacent planting areas. Real grass fields or artificial turf fields are both permeable. So basically anywhere we can remove asphalt, we're doing what we can to get that done.
Real quick, I'm going to take a moment to riff off Kira's mention of the maintenance, and I know that you mentioned maintenance before. Yes, maintenance is so key. It is a huge challenge across everyone I know who's talking about green infrastructure. Maintenance is a super high on the list of conversation topics, and what I want to put out there is that maintenance in terms of green infrastructure is the low-hanging fruit. It's infrastructure that's already in place. We've already paid for it. All we have to do is keep it functioning well and looking beautiful. And so it's really, if we're gonna get the bang for our buck, man, that's where we got to start. Let's keep up the amazingness of green infrastructure by maintaining it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for all of your questions. I'm trying to filter through them and ask as many as possible. And if we don't get to them, we will try to address them in a follow-up email. So we can follow up with you afterward. But I think we have time for a couple more. One of them sort of also at the technical level. Can you explain the connection between green infrastructure in cities and water flowing from the land to the bay? So this is a systems question, an infrastructure question. The follow-up to that is, isn't stormwater flowing down the drain treated and pollution removed before it gets to the bay? So this person is wondering about why are we concerned about water flowing down storm drains and its impact on the bay? So helping to unpack how that infrastructure looks in our region, I think would help folks understand.
Okay, I'll jump in. I love this question. It's right in my line of work. So, okay, throughout most of the region, water that is flowing off the landscape actually goes directly to the bay untreated. It is primarily only in the city of San Francisco where there is a storm sewer system that combines sewer water and stormwater and treats it before going out into the bay. So super important that we capture as many pollutants as we can before entering the bay from most of the region. Yes, in San Francisco, there is treatment. However, the system gets overloaded, especially during storms. And so there are discharges of untreated. They're trying to minimize that as much as possible by installing green infrastructure. And then they're also looking at very, very costly system upgrades to manage all of the stormwater and sewerage at the same time, especially in our intensifying storms. So even in a city like San Francisco where it gets treated, yes, green infrastructure has a place, particularly in infiltrating water, but also slowing its getting into the system. And then around the rest of the bay, we're very interested in capturing pollutants before it goes straight into the bay.
Yeah, I'm so glad you elaborated on the technical piece, Alicia. This question for me brings to mind a video clip some of you may have seen. This winter, after one of the many atmospheric rivers passed over the bay, there was footage of a young man in East Oakland inner tubing through the streets because there was so much storm water. Very dangerous given the quality of the water and all of the pollutants and invisible objects within it. But additionally, it just makes you realize these are the streets that communities are walking to school in, right? So every gallon of water that we can capture, that we keep from becoming a flood crisis that a community is going to have to deal with hands-on, makes a meaningful impact, and green infrastructure goes so far to do that. We estimate that with just 3 schoolyard renovations, we keep an estimated 580,000 gallons of stormwater out of the system every year. So just, yeah, kind of connecting those dots of when water falls onto paved surfaces, it just flows, and we end up turning our streets into rivers, and it's communities whose infrastructure hasn't been updated or maintained that end up being hit the hardest. And that's usually, as we've discussed, communities that are low income and mostly of color.
Great, thank you. All right, well, last question will be a speed question. So first thing that comes to mind before I wrap up this conversation that I could frankly do for another 60 minutes. You both have been so insightful. But my last question for you, super quick, what are you excited about in your work right now? What's energizing you?
I feel like green schoolyards are getting a little bit of a moment in the spotlight right now. I think there's a sea change, and people are starting to loop them into the important conversations that are happening about green infrastructure, like this one that Save the Bay hosted today. And that's really energizing. I think for a long time it was kind of a fringe movement, you know, a sweet thing to do with kids, environmental ed, and we're finally starting to see it as real infrastructure, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, cool. I'm so excited about schoolyards, Kira, based on your presentation. Thank you. We're working on a project at SFEI. We're collaborating with UC Berkeley and a nonprofit organization called Urban Tilth in Richmond, and a community planner organizer in Oakland. And we're working with communities in Oakland and Richmond, underserved communities, where we're working through an educating and then planning process to identify what types of green infrastructure are desired in these communities, where they should go, and then developing plans to present and help and find funding for. So, and then we'll also be doing some implementation work. So it's a really cool project that, you know, hopefully we'll be getting, you know, on the ground with these communities, like at the very beginning stages of planning. And I think that's a really important process, is to start at the very beginning with communities to figure out what they want and where they want it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. It's 6 o'clock, and I want to respect everyone's time. Kira and Alicia, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us and your enthusiasm for the work that you're doing. We look forward to, you know, working with both of you into the future to bring more of these projects to life. And my final, you know, message to attendees is, if you were excited by what you heard here tonight and want to help us continue to do our work and provide free events like this, you can donate online. And there will be a link here in the chat for you to visit if you would like to continue supporting Save the Bay's work. We also hope you'll join us for our next climate conversation in November, topic to be determined. So thank you both once again for joining us tonight, Kira and Alicia, and thank you everyone else for listening in, and I hope you all have a great evening.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thanks, y'all.